Good afternoon and welcome to Understanding the Basics of Federal and State Conservation Programs. My name is Audrey Thompson and I'm a staff attorney here with the Center for Agricultural and Shale Law. Here at the center, we provide numerous resources for agricultural and shale legal stakeholders and rural communities through our website at aglaw.psu.edu. Here on our homepage, we feature our upcoming events, our social media feed, and our latest Agricultural Law Weekly Review, which provides an update of recent ag law developments, including a full listing of ag-related state and national legislation and executive branch publications. We also publish our Shale Law Weekly Review, which covers recent oil and gas and energy-related developments. All of our publications are available for email subscription, so you can receive those right in your inbox every week if you sign up for them. We also host a research by topic feature where we maintain our virtual resource rooms, which provide compiled resources on multiple singular topics in agricultural and shale law. We also provide our agricultural and shale law issue trackers, which are similar to the resource rooms in that they are focused on a particular topic, but these provide more of a timeline of developments for each issue, so you can see an issue developing through statutes, regulations, or case law. We also produce audio and video content with our Agricultural and Shale Law podcasts, which are available on all the major podcast platforms, and our YouTube channel, where a recording of this webinar will be posted for future viewing. Additionally, the center operates the Pennsylvania Agricultural Mediation Program, which is funded by USDA. This program has historically facilitated mediations between ag producers and the USDA, but its authorization has been expanded over the last several years, and we are now able to mediate a broader range of issues between different parties. Jackie Schweickler is our program coordinator, so please feel free to reach out to Jackie with any questions about ag mediation. And finally, on our website, you can go to our events page, which lists all of our upcoming events and presentations, where you probably registered for this webinar. I do want to let you know, if you hover over events and click on past events, you can find PowerPoints and other materials from our presentations posted on the event page after each event. All right, so today's presentation is on federal and state conservation programs as part of the Center's Understanding Agricultural Law series, a course of webinars designed to provide subject matter literacy and competence on fundamental issues of agricultural law to attorneys and business advisors who work with or represent agricultural or rural clients, but who may not necessarily specialize in agricultural law. This series is wholly sponsored by the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture's Ag Business Development Center, which was established through the 2019 Pennsylvania Farm Bill. The Agricultural Business Development Center aims to enhance the long-term vitality of Pennsylvania farms by supporting farm transitions, both from generation to generation and from conventional to organic farming, supporting beginning farmers, providing risk management education, and providing financial assistance through low-interest loans and grants. This is the 8th webinar in the Understanding Agricultural Law series. Previous topics include ag labor laws, farmland leasing for energy development, land use regulation for agriculture, legal protections for ag operations, agricultural cooperatives, livestock market regulation, and crop insurance. Recordings of all of these webinars are available on our YouTube site. Upcoming topics in our Understanding the Basics of Ag Law series include licensing and regulation of direct agricultural product sales on December 16th, agriculture finance on January 27th, and Pennsylvania's Clean and Green Preferential Tax Assessment Program on February 24th. Registration for the December and January webinars is open on our events page. And finally, just a few reminders before we get started. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for later viewing on our YouTube channel. If you have signed up for CLE credits, there will be a link posted in the chat and you will need to fill out that form to get your credits. And as part of our responsibility to ensure attendance for CLE, after Ross's portion, I will provide a code word that you will be prompted to enter into your CLE form. And please use the Q&A feature for any questions. All right, our first presenter on conservation programs is Ross Pifer. Ross serves as the director for Pennsylvania's Center for Agricultural and Shale Law and is a professor at Penn State Law, where he teaches oil and gas law and property law. Ross, the screen is yours.
Okay, thanks a lot, Audrey. Okay, so just to provide an overview of what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to start off. I'm going to talk about conservation programs broadly, get into a little bit of the history, and then talk about federal programs. And I guess when I say federal conservation programs, we're talking about USDA. So I'm going to talk about some of the major USDA programs. Then I'm going to hand the baton to Brook Duer, and Brook is going to talk about state conservation programs and some recent developments related to the Inflation Reduction Act. Okay, so when we talk about environmental regulation broadly, often you kind of characterize various programs or methods of trying to encourage environmental behavior as kind of a carrot or a stick, meaning that if you have a program that's utilizing the carrot, it's rewarding good behavior. In contrast, the stick, you're punishing bad behavior. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is to alter behavior or encourage certain behavior that is thought to advance particular goals. And so when you look at this question as it relates to agriculture, there are some challenges in utilizing kind of a more traditional regulatory enforcement-based model, because we have a lot of small farms or smaller operations. And so, you think about from an enforcement standpoint, that's going to increase the costs of enforcement. Also, when you have an enforcement model, you're establishing certain thresholds that each entity needs to meet. You're not encouraging them to go beyond that. You're just mandating a certain minimum threshold. Also with agriculture, sometimes we have challenges kind of identifying how to measure or identify and measure certain whatever the substances that we're trying to address through regulation. And so with regard to agriculture, I mean, we certainly have some of the more traditional enforcement-based environmental standards, but I think we have a lot more of the kind of the carrots, where we're providing some type of incentive to encourage producers to engage in certain activities. And when you look at the traditional role of USDA versus EPA in this area, USDA's programs really are largely incentive based, where USDA is providing something of value to farmers for farmers to engage in certain behavior, in contrast with EPA, which is providing a standard that must be met, or there will be some type of enforcement action. And I think that may explain some of the different perceptions. If you ask a producer how they feel about USDA versus EPA, I think you're much likely to get a more positive impression of USDA. So today we're talking about, we're going to, or at least in my session, I'm going to talk about USDA. So we're talking about the carrots. We're talking about the incentives to farmers to engage in activities that are viewed as being environmentally beneficial. And this pie chart, when we talk about benefits provided to farmers, you often start at the Farm Bill, because that's the piece of legislation that really is establishing farm policy, is authorizing the expenditure for a lot of these programs. And this pie chart is looking at the titles that are second, third, and fourth in terms of expenditure. So this pie chart is setting aside nutrition, which accounts for I think it's about 78% of spending in the Farm Bill. But once you get beyond the nutrition title, you'll see that the commodity, Title I, the commodity programs, those are the traditional farm subsidies, the direct payments, the counter-cyclical payments, marketing assistance loans, that's about equal to Title II, which are the conservation programs, which are what we're going to talk about today. And then crop insurance is substantial as well. But I think most people, when they think of the Farm Bill, they think of expenditures, the subsidies in Title I, those traditional commodity payments. And we've over the last several farm bills, we've kind of gotten to a point of where the Title I programs, the cost for those are really almost, it's almost on par with the Title II conservation programs. And so you think of this concept of kind of green payments, which is a term that you sometimes hear as a referencing payments that are made to ag producers for some type of environmental benefit. Now, traditionally, Title I, or what the programs that are currently under Title I, they were designed to enhance the incomes of producers. The programs under Title II are really done to encourage the land use or production practices. But there is a merger in terms of the thought that, well, if we want to provide the safety net that traditionally has come under Title I, we can do that through conservation programs. And so, the money that is being provided to farmers through conservation programs is somewhat replacing the money that historically has been provided to farmers through the traditional commodity programs. Now, why has there been a shifting, or why are we looking at providing payments, these so-called green payments? And it is to receive the environmental benefits, or to encourage farmers to take actions that are going to provide environmental benefits. And we really don't have any effective market for or historically, we've not had any effective market for these environmental goods and services. And it is a way of providing income support. If we want to provide that safety net, why can't we do that through conservation or other environmental programs? And this final bullet, I think, is important to recognize as well, that directly subsidizing farmers is not in accord with our international trade obligations, or it creates problems with our international trade obligations. And so if we provide the funding for conservation purposes, that's very friendly to our international trade obligations. If it's providing the safety net that farmers need, and it's providing environmental benefits, we're getting much more out of those programs than we are if they were provided through the traditional commodity programs. Okay, so kind of shifting now specifically to the USDA conservation programs, just to talk briefly about kind of the players. NRCS and FSA, the NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, FSA, the Farm Service Agency. Those are the two agencies that farmers are going to be dealing with. The FSA, generally speaking, the FSA is going to be the agency that farmers are probably going to initially interface with. The administrative work is probably going to be done by FSA, but NRCS provides all of the technical support, the technical services with regard to these programs. And then the final agency identified here, the Commodity Credit Corporation, this provides the money. And I guess I look at the CCC really as kind of as USDA's piggy bank. It has no employees. It has a board. I think it's a 7-member board, but there are no employees. But this is I don't want to call it a bank, because a bank has people that work there. That's why I refer to it as a piggy bank, because it's really just it's a pot of money that Congress puts money into it, and then the money gets taken out for the various farm programs. Okay, so the major types of USDA conservation programs. First, we have conservation compliance, which ties the Title II payments with, or it conditions the Title I payments upon certain conservation requirements. Title II, or excuse me, land retirement is in Title II, and these are payments, or these are programs where land is being taken out of agricultural production, in contrast with working lands programs where payments are being made to farmers for lands that are in agricultural production. And we'll talk in more detail about each of these programs. And then finally easements, which really are much less prevalent at the federal level. The easements are generally, this is a major program more at the state level. Okay, so getting into some of the history of conservation programs, like a lot of national ag policy, we go back to the 1930s. The Great Depression really formed the base for a lot of agricultural programs. The Dust Bowl similarly. And I think in the East, I don't think we really learned that much about the Dust Bowl in school. But as I've learned more about it, I continue to be fascinated just by what happened. And I don't think I completely understood just how agriculture really was at the center, or agricultural practices were really integral to what happened in the Dust Bowl. As you had settlers moving from the East who farmed in the East, they moved to the Great Plains, and they just continued to use the same agricultural practices, even though the land was considerably different. The Great Plains, you have kind of the historic cycles of drought, and and some of the in terms of trying to tie the agricultural production to the climate conditions that existed at that time, there were sayings like, rain follows the plow, meaning, if we just keep plowing the land, we'll get rain to come, which, obviously that didn't work. And you had an extended drought, which was exacerbated by the agricultural practices. After the Dust Bowl, there really became a focus on soil conservation programs. Really, a lot of educational programs to try to minimize, so that people understood the impact that their cultivation practices were having, to try to minimize the soil erosion. And there also were, as part of the early farm programs after the Great Depression, there were a number of set-aside programs for the purpose of supply control. So if we took this land out of agricultural production, it would have the idea was that it would have cause an increase in the prices for agricultural commodities. So that was a focus of some of the early farm programs. Now, you can look at those early programs, which were taking land out of production, and compare today's land retirement programs, which take land out of production. But the purpose for those programs was really very different. Where the early programs were focused on supply control, the more modern programs are focused on providing a conservation benefit. Now, I have included a couple resources on the Dust Bowl. We have a document that you can obtain on our events page, which has today's PowerPoint, and it also has a document listing resources. And I have these links to a couple Dust Bowl videos on there as well. If you haven't really studied much about the Dust Bowl, I encourage you to do that. And I've given you a couple links there so you can go to those videos. Okay, conservation compliance. This was initiated in the 1985 Farm Bill and then expanded in the 1990 Farm Bill. And conservation compliance is an eligibility requirement for the Title I program. So the direct payments, marketing assistance loans, the counter-cyclical payments. A farmer has to be in compliance with the so-called sod buster and the so-called swamp buster provision, meaning you can't have violated those two provisions. Now, what are sod buster and swamp buster? Sod buster applies to highly erodible land. Swamp buster applies to wetlands. So basically, you can't farm on or you can't convert highly erodible land or wetlands without a conservation plan, or you're going to forfeit your eligibility for any Title I payments. So I mean, this can be, this is somewhat of a cross between the carrot and the stick, because we're saying you are not entitled to receive these benefits from Title I if you have violated these. And this applies to a farmer's entire operation, not just to the particular land that is in violation. So this can be a pretty powerful tool. And again, this was 1985, so this was one of the first modern conservation programs. Now, the other types of programs, and I kind of mentioned this early, I mean, with land retirement, you're taking what is supposed to be environmentally sensitive land out of agricultural production. The working lands, you're saying, okay, a farmer needs to engage in ongoing stewardship on land that they are farming. And then the easement programs, again, you're imposing some type of restriction. Perhaps the land is in ag production, perhaps it is not in ag production. Okay, so this slide shows you, it lists the current conservation programs on the right, and then on the left is a slide that's a few years old, but it shows you kind of the funding for the different types of programs. And you'll notice the in blue, the working lands programs, the really pretty significant increase in working lands programs over the last couple decades. I mean, it just lists Conservation Reserve, which is the major land retirement program, and you see that's been relatively steady. Easements at the federal level have increased somewhat, but they're still a relatively small amount. Okay, CREP, or the Conservation Reserve Program. This was established in 1985, so this was, again, at that very, very early stage of the modern programs. We're trying to take environmentally sensitive land out of ag production. So farmers can submit an application. If it's accepted, they get a 10 to 15 year contract, and they receive an annual payment, which is, you know, roughly equal or slightly below the market rate. So, you know, sometimes people view this as basically they're renting land to the government, and they're not going to use that land for agricultural production. The farmer goes to the FSA office. There are different types of signups. There's a continuous sign-up for land, for particularly environmentally sensitive land. There's a regular sign up for land that doesn't quite meet that standard. So farmers just need to check with their FSA office to see when they can apply. Generally, they have to have owned the land for a year, and it has to have been in cultivation or had an agricultural crop for 4 out of the 6 years. Now, you know, why this time frame, 2012 to 2017? Well, those were the 6 years preceding the last farm bill. So presumably that will be updated when we get a new farm bill. But you know, this is the idea. This is, you're taking land out of production. So we want to make sure that the land was in production in order for the farmer to qualify. When you're looking at you know, what farms are going to be accepted, or what applications are going to be accepted, these are the benefits that the farm is analyzed, or that the particular, I shouldn't say farm, that the piece of land, because this is looking at the tract of land that would be enrolled in CREP. You're looking at wildlife habitat, water quality, air quality. You're looking at benefits that will extend beyond that contract period, and then each piece of property gets a score, and then that's how USDA decides what applications are going to be accepted. As far as criticisms of CRP, you know, I think the main one is that it's raising farmland rental rates, that basically USDA is competing with farmers for ag land, because if I'm a landowner, if I can get a certain amount of money from USDA by enrolling this land in CREP, I'm probably going to do that. I'm not going to rent that out to someone who is looking to engage in agricultural production. But that's kind of the idea, that we're saying for certain land is best not in agricultural production. And so that's the land that a farmer, because it's generally not going to be as productive. Those are the pieces of land that a farmer is going to choose to enroll in CREP. Okay, EQIP is a working land program, And this was established in the 1996 Farm Bill. So this is really the first of the modern working lands program. And again, you contrast this with CREP, where CREP, you're taking land out of production, and the environmental benefits are realized by virtue of that land not having agricultural production. With EQIP, you're saying, okay, this land is in production, but we want to install conservation practices to get benefits on land while it's being farmed. And so EQIP provides technical and financial assistance. And I mean, really, EQIP is known as providing that cost share. So farmers can install conservation practices and they get reimbursed at, you know, a particular rate, but USDA is giving them the financial as well as the technical support to implement those practices. They're also, you know, some farmers, if you meet certain, fall within certain categories, you can get paid ahead of time for installing those practices. And there are targeted initiatives, as I have showing here on the screen, for high tunnels, organic, landscape conservation, which is really focused on wildlife habitat for targeted species, and then on farm energy. And there are some other targeted initiatives as well, but I think these are probably the ones that are most applicable in Pennsylvania. Okay, the Conservation Stewardship Program is another working land program. So you know, we're encouraging or incentivizing these conservation practices on land that is being farmed. Now, there's contracts just like with CREP, although this is a 5-year contract with a 5-year renewal. And a big difference between CSP and CRP or CREP is that CSP is looking at the entire farm. So a farmer is enrolling their entire farm. It's not a particular piece of property, it's the entire farm. And to meet the eligibility, there are certain conservation thresholds in a variety of areas that have to be met or exceeded. You know, or there are a bunch of areas, and a farmer has to meet or exceed those thresholds in at least 2 areas, and then agree to meet or exceed that threshold in a 3rd area. So, you know, this program, I think, is a little more complicated to kind of wrap your arms around exactly what you have to do in this program. CREP is relatively easy. You're just not farming on a particular tract of land. That tract of land is enrolled. With CSP, you're looking at the entire farm, and you have to install or to utilize certain practices to improve your environmental sustainability of that farm. So it's looking at the entire farm. It's more fact specific in terms of figuring out how you're going to score and you know, how attractive your application is going to be. Now, a farm can receive up to $40,000 annually through the CSP program. If you're interested in learning more about this, I would encourage you to take a look at the National Sustainable Ag Coalition has a pretty extensive farmer's guide, and again, I have the link on that page of resources that I would encourage you to take a look at that to give you more details on exactly how that program operates. Now, let's look at just, you know, what's the prevalence of CRP and CSP, which are, you know, the 2 major USDA programs. CRP, again, being a land retirement program, CSP being a working land program. And you can see that, you know, in just looking at Pennsylvania, that 2% of the ag land in Pennsylvania is enrolled in CRP, and 4% enrolled in CSP. I was a little surprised at that. That we had a greater CSP enrollment than CRP. You know, when you look at CRP or CREP across the country, it's more uniform. I was a little surprised also at CSP that you have certain pockets of you know, certain states that really utilize that very, very heavily, and other states not so much. Okay. So that's an overview of the federal programs, the federal USDA conservation program. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Audrey.
Thanks, Ross. All right. Well, we're paused here. Our CLE code word is Swamp Buster. For those of you filling out a CLE form, you will need to enter Swamp Buster on your form. I repeat again, Swamp Buster, SWAMPBUSTER, Swamp Buster, not Buster Swamp, Swamp Buster is the CLE word. Write it down, copy it, paste it.
Well, Audrey, we'll probably take Buster Swamp, won't we? No.
I like Buster Swamp. It sounds like a name of a person. All right. Our next presenter is Brook Duer. Brook will talk about Pennsylvania state conservation programs and the recently enacted Inflation Reduction Act. Brook joined the Center for Agricultural and Shale Law as a staff attorney in 2019. Prior to coming to the Center for Agricultural and Shale Law, Brook served as chief counsel to the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, and before joining PDA, he practiced law in Lancaster County for 18 years. Brook routinely publishes and presents throughout the state on agricultural issues and serves as the mainstay commentator for the Center's Agricultural Law podcast.
Thanks for attending another one of our basic Understanding the Basics webinars. Again, for those of you who have advanced knowledge of these programs, please excuse us, but we are attempting to create a foundational understanding of some of these programs and people that may not have that foundational understanding. And then as we go on with this series, we're going to go into the deep dives and get a lot more specific and get to wrestle with a lot more complex things at times. Of course, it's easy to follow up a simple thing too sometimes. So I apologize in advance if I have a little misstatement or get a number wrong here. So let's talk about state conservation programs. So we've just went through the structure that exists at the federal level through USDA's NRCS as well as FSA, and Ross familiarized you with some of the maybe we'll call it the psychology behind the programs. And we're really in an interesting spot where this type of conservation as it exists today as sort of a set of practices that are dealing with soil and water have really evolved to the point where we have a few number of very strong programs, and now and I should say some of the things that follow after those big federal programs might be a bit more regional or local to issues in particular states, particularly to the extent that they have budgetary funds. And of course, everything's always a product of budgetary funds. So sometimes there simply is not room for state conservation programs funded by state government. Now, it doesn't mean that you might not have state entities akin to conservation districts as we have here who do work relating to federal requirements and federal programs. But in any event, the two main entities in Pennsylvania state government that deal with the conservation programs, no surprise, first, Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, and then second, the State Conservation Commission, which is technically, while it is administratively housed within the state, Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, is technically a separate and freestanding entity in its own way based on certain characteristics that it has. And it is a pretty unique one in Pennsylvania law in terms of the way it is set up, and I'll go over that a little bit. But the Department of Agriculture's main conservation program, we didn't want to ignore this portion, although we're not going to spend a lot of time on it here, which is the Agricultural Conservation Easement Purchase Program that Pennsylvania runs through the Department of Agriculture's Bureau of Farmland Preservation. And most of you may have some familiarity, obviously highly successful program, very nationally ranked or acclaimed, one of the top programs in the country, if not the top program, depends on how you measure these things. And so the State Agricultural Lands Preservation Board is the entity itself that essentially votes on whether the state is going to use its authority to purchase agricultural conservation easements. And agricultural conservation easements are purchased in Pennsylvania through a combination of state monies, and Pennsylvania's General Assembly over the years has generously funded the state funding portion of what is used to purchase ag conservation easements. And then there can be county money, and several counties in Pennsylvania have contributed to the pot of money that the Pennsylvania General Assembly continues to contribute to annually. And even townships in this state are able and do in fact participate in the purchase of ag conservation easements. And lastly, there is federal money that comes through NRCS, as Ross was describing. And generally, we'll just say that the federal role in Pennsylvania is generally to reimburse costs that are related to the application and sale process, whereby the landowner is selling their development rights, so to speak, or their rights to do anything other than an ag use on the property. And the federal money is used to reimburse certain costs associated with that entire process. So there's federal money, state money, can be county money, can be township money, all of which can be mixed up in different configurations to purchase easements. And then everybody who contributes has a right to enforce those easements. And of course, those easements are essentially an easement that requires the landowner to maintain the property in a viable agricultural production method of some kind, producing some type of agricultural commodity. And again, don't want to spend too much more time on that. Other than that, it's sort of its own topic, and we're going to talk about the other things that qualify as conservation programs. Now, that's generally in Pennsylvania falling under the State Conservation Commission, and again, I told you a little bit about unique nature of it. It's administratively housed at the PDA, and so in the PDA building, the State Conservation Commission staff are in fact PDA employees. But there's also a subject matter expertise portion that is housed at DEP. And so there are employees who are DEP employees who also contribute to and or work under the State Conservation Commission. And so it's a shared entity between PDA and DEP. Also, the executive secretary, which is sort of the day-to-day CEO of the operation, is part of PDA, but there's a unique feature, which I'll get to in a subsequent slide, about how that works, and it is pretty unique. Now, the commission chairperson rotates between the Secretary of Ag and the Secretary of DEP, and this is all very unique in terms of state entities of this nature. There's really nothing else quite like it. Now, and of course, the State Conservation Commission has its origins in the same issues historically of the mid-20th century. Now, the first state conservation program that I'm going to talk about, and I'm really only talk about a small little handful, is what's called REAP, a Resource Enhancement and Protection Program. And the REAP program was enacted in 2007. What it does is gives tax credits towards Pennsylvania income tax to incentivize conservation efforts, the same types of best management practices and other conservation measures that Ross was discussing in the federal programs. So it's, again, more incentivization of the same types of practices. Every year, in the annual budget, there is a yearly amount set. It used to be 10 million, as this slide shows. It's now up to, I think it's 13 million. I think I have it in a subsequent slide just to make sure I don't get it wrong. And so farmers and businesses can earn state income tax credits in exchange for installing these various conservation practices. And people are familiar with things like the the film tax credit, and there's a whole office over at DCED that does that, and to incentivize the production of film here in Pennsylvania. Similar setup, and that's obviously an easy way for a state government not to have to appropriate existing funds, but to essentially just forego future funds in the form of future income tax revenues in order to incentivize certain behavior. Okay, the REAP program, sort of, I guess, Ross, you must have created this little alliteration, the self, sell, and sponsor. Farmer receives a tax credit, or the landowner receives a tax credit. The farmer landowner can sell the tax credit to another taxpayer, but doesn't have to. And entities can sponsor the financing of these BMPs, essentially by paying for them to be installed, and then they receive the tax credit after the landowner receives them and transferred to them, and they can be the sponsor. I shouldn't say it. It's really a direct, sponsorship of the BMPs, and then they receive the tax credit. Or the landowner can finance themselves whatever it is that they're applying to get the tax credit, or what measures it is that they're relying upon to get the tax credit. They recoup the cost via direct use of the tax credit, or they sell the tax credit themselves. And the challenge with this has always been development of a robust market for the tax credits. However, the tax credits have never gone wanting for use. They have been always exhausted every single year since they've been offered. I came to PDA right when this program had started, and was there not when it was enacted, but when it was first implemented. Or I'll put it this way, I wasn't chief counsel when it was enacted. I was when it was first implemented. Okay, general eligibility, an ag operation with, you know what, I got these slides, they're in reverse order, so I'm going to do it this way. Wait a minute, hold on. There we go. General eligibility requirements. The ag operation must have and be in compliance with or develop as part of the project a current conservation plan, current agricultural ENS or erosion and sedimentation control plan, if it's applicable. Depends on the amount of earth disturbance that is going on and how much heavy use animal area there is. And then a current nutrient management plan if required. And again, that's based on essentially the amount of animals that you have, i.e. How much nutrients they may be producing that you need to manage. And other, we're going to go backwards to the slide that should have come next, which is also agricultural operations with animal concentration areas must implement BMPs to address stormwater runoff, loss of sediment, in other words, loss of soil through runoff, loss of nutrients, again through runoff, and runoff of other pollutants also. So let's now get back in the right order here. Okay, so the amount of tax credits. I was kindly directed by Carl Brown, who contacted me earlier this morning, to tell me that $150,000 per person has in fact been increased to $250,000 per person. And so thank you, Carl. And so that is now the individual applicant limit. The projects can qualify for the tax credits equal to either 75%, 50%, or 25% of whatever the eligible project costs were. The tax credits can be carried over for up to 15 years. In other words, obviously, when you get a whopping state income tax credit, the state income tax, rates being what they are and how the whole program is administered, it's tough to use those, in 1 year. And so, they're able to be carried forward for 15 years by the person holding them. And there's a process. They submit their application to the State Conservation Commission. They complete the eligible project, and then they receive their tax credit from the Department of Revenue. And I'll just keep moving so that I can move on to the other topics. And so that's essentially one program that's existed with us since the early 2000s. Thereabouts. Where we are right now, this is taken from the State Conservation Commission meeting minutes from the October meeting, which is that in 22-23, the REAP program received its $13 million funding, which is the increase from $10 million where it started. And that was increased in 2019 as part of the first Pennsylvania Farm Bill. And actually, no, that's not the first one, is it? And then the commission gives you its dates here. You know, they started accepting applications August 1 of 2022, and they received 285. And there's 154 carryovers from the previous application year, which it's permitted under the statute if they were unfunded to carry them over, and from the previous year. And at this point in time, as of October 3, we're approaching 13 million in approved applications. And so the application period is now closed. And that's generally what's happened every year. They've been used, and it's been a great, great program. You know, it's the beginning steps, as we'll see in a few minutes. You know, it was considered to be a big move, a big step at the time. Now it's kind of getting dwarfed by other things, which we'll see in a minute. Okay, State Conservation Commission. Let's talk about the structure and how it works. I wish somebody had explained this to me when I was a young lawyer, because I did not understand the setup. All these years I was in private practice, I was very ignorant of exactly you know, what and who to go to when you had a landowner that had an issue. Again, the PDA staff is the primary staff of the State Conservation Commission, but then there's this subject matter expertise component from DEP. The enabling legislation is called the Conservation District Law, and that goes back to 1945. And this is the unique feature. The commission itself, the actual commission, the body who has, you know, monthly meetings, they are the ones who select and employ the executive secretary, who is the CEO of the commission's day-to-day functions. And so that person is technically neither an employee of DEP nor an employee of PDA, and arguably not necessarily considered to be a governor or an employee of the governor, which, you know, all executive agency employees are. The only person that can, or the only entity that can remove that person is the actual commission itself. And don't confuse this with DCNR, which is, of course, an entire executive agency all on its own that manages the PA parks and the publicly owned state forests. Even though they have the name conservation in the title, they don't do conservation programs, as we are discussing here today. Now, the authority of the State Conservation Commission has evolved over the years. And the language here is, in the first couple bullets, is how it appeared when it was first enacted. Essentially, you know, the mission is conservation of soil, water, control and prevention of soil erosion. Now, they designate conservation districts to be responsible for implementing programs, projects, and activities to quantify, prevent, and control non-point sources of pollution, meaning things that are essentially entering waterways by virtue of not a pipe, but by surface water runoff, i.e. stormwater runoff. And that's sort of where the name non-point source was coined, is in this statute, I believe. I could be wrong. Now, they also approve and coordinate the programs of each individual county conservation district, and they apportion all their funding, the funding that's available to the various conservation districts across the state. So they have the power of the purse strings, essentially, to see what counties are getting how much, depending on what their issues are and their demands are in terms of where the money is most needed. And they are essentially also responsible, as you see here, be responsible for the expenditure of such funds by the districts. So ultimately, the authority to control how all those funds are used still comes back to the State Conservation Commission. Even though these county conservation districts are many times made up of county employees, what they're doing and how they're using this money is directly controlled by this state entity. Counties initiate the creation of a conservation district. That's the little green type I have here. And counties, of course, may, it's in the law, it's a may, also appropriate their own funding for the conservation district. And that is very routine that they do, but there are counties that are perhaps less generous with funding of that nature than others. You have to go back to the logic of when counties wanted to be part of this, because it is technically a voluntary thing. And in fact, we have a county in this state that doesn't have one. We'll get to that in a minute. Audrey, do you need to be jumping in here? I see you turned your camera on. Now, the other powers here are we have a poll going up. The other powers.
I just wanted to remind participants, if you have any questions, please put those in the Q&A. We'll try to leave a couple minutes at the end to address any questions you might have. And our poll 2 just popped up there, so please answer that.
All right. So and then the evolution here in 1986, and then subsequently in 2008, nutrient management and odor management was added, and then here's the REAP program added here in 2008. So eventually, the conservation district law catches up to the things that the General Assembly is a sort of apportioning out to as a new duty of the State Conservation Commission. And nutrient management and odor management came along at the same time that the acre program came along. Excuse me, not nutrient management, odor management. And nutrient management and all of the things that the nutrient management law, or excuse me, the Nutrient Management Act entails is a very, very core function of the State Conservation Commission. We won't talk about those now. And then this was added in 2008 also about grant, loan, and tax credit programs, again, referencing REAP, but also other things to implement non-point source and other best management practices. Okay, that's a little bit there, sort of the enabling legislation. Here's a little map that shows you where they all are. Wherever you are in the state, you got one, a county conservation district near you. And again, they are controlled by the State Conservation Commission, but they're manned, and the conservation districts are made up of employees who get paid in different ways. Sometimes they're on the county payroll. Sometimes they might be part of county government, completely, integrated into county government. Sometimes they're sort of more freestanding entities. So it can vary from county to county. Where we don't have one is Philadelphia County down here. And with the advent of urban agriculture, and the proliferation, particularly Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, are really models and very active. Pittsburgh has, there's an Allegheny County Conservation District. There is no Philadelphia. Will there be one someday? Hopefully. There's a couple links here that could help you out. The PA Association of Conservation Districts is a great resource, and they have a great website. And they have all kinds of good stuff on there. You sign up to their newsletter, you learn all kinds of great stuff. There's a nice little video here about explains the conservation districts in more detail. It's well, I'll leave it at that for now. Okay, now here's PA's unique conservation predicament. We make up 35% of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. The Upper Bay freshwater flow is 90% ours. The entire bay's freshwater flow is 50% ours. So we have this unique thing that all these functions that are meant to be controlled by the State Conservation Commission, a lot of the impact of them are outside our borders. We are in a very unusual predicament in that regard, but not unlike, how the Mississippi River also impacts things. And, we're just living through the Susquehanna River's odyssey with regard to its contributions to the Chesapeake Bay. Someday we'll be living this with the Mississippi. In any event, 75% of the 2025 state nutrient reduction targets for the entire Chesapeake Bay region are Pennsylvania's reduction targets. There's more than 12,000 miles of streams in the Bay watershed that have high levels of the three nutrients that we're after reducing in the Chesapeake Bay cleanup efforts: nitrogen, phosphorus, and then general sediments. And those give you some sort of what the targets actually are and what they translate to on a yearly basis. And then, of course, we're in the middle of the phase 3 WIP implementation at this point in time, which does include what are called county action plans, which will come up in a minute. Now, here's the earth-moving event that has occurred, and that's what I want to talk about for the rest of the time, which is the 2022 and 2023 state budget funding transferred a 207% increase in the funding for the conservation districts that would be then meted out by the State Conservation Commission to the various conservation districts. That's obviously a whopping increase, unlike anything else that you ever see in state government. Why? Because of the Chesapeake Bay and what we are facing. So this is the main instrument, the conservation districts, in the efforts to restore the bay and to deal with all those out-of-state consequences that we, Pennsylvania, are saddled with, let's just say. Now, the other earth-shattering event was the creation of the Clean Streams Fund and the appropriation of $220 million for a program, and 154 of which is for a program called Agricultural Conservation Assistance Program, or ACAP. And the ACAP program is a brand new program as of this summer, and is something like we've never seen before. It's larger than any state conservation program Pennsylvania has ever enacted or conducted. And now some of the other programs may add up in time to those kind of numbers, but this one is just a whopper. And so this is a groundbreaking thing that occurred this summer in the state budget, and it is of course very welcomed by all of the other Chesapeake Bay watershed contributors, Maryland, Virginia, et cetera. And so that is just something that is unprecedented in terms of the amount of money and the amount of time that this money has to be pushed out. And again, what is it all for? It's all for the same things. Best management practices with regard to controlling nutrient and sediment runoff and stormwater. And so it is both, and of course, so it is both a soil conservation measure as well as a water quality measure. And so just the other day, earlier this week, on November 15th, the State Conservation Commission approved, subject to some approvals from the Office of General Counsel, the mechanics of how the program will operate. A lot more to come, but this was a big week with regard to the ACAP program, and began to move this thing forward. So one of the biggest things that's going to happen is the State Conservation Commission is charged with administering and overseeing and delegating certain portions of this program now to the conservation districts, can also delegate to Penn State College of Ag Science or other cooperating organizations. And again, the $154 million is the direct funding to go to farmers. And then some of the other funding can be used essentially for the administrative and technical assistance to the farmers and landowners in doing the BMPs. But $154 million is for the direct funding of the BMPs themselves. And this has to be committed by essentially the end of 2024. So we're looking at a very quick timetable to push out that much money on individual projects that have to be completed on the ground. And has to be spent, at least has to be committed by 2024, and then spent by 2026. So that is the major. The ACAP program is a major development in state conservation programs, like nothing Pennsylvania has ever seen before. And it's all about, or I shouldn't say it's all about, it is primarily motivated by the Pennsylvania obligations with regard to the Chesapeake Bay restoration. Now, earth-shattering event number 2 was the Inflation Reduction Act. And what we have here is signed in August, as you will all remember, single largest investment in essentially conservation programs ever in US history. $20 billion, yes, that's $billion, is essentially been allocated to these programs that Ross went through and talked about. The EQIP program, this is outside of the Farm Bill. This is in a sort of, as we got essentially a year-ish, so to speak, left to implement a new Farm Bill, all of a sudden this money is just pouring into these programs at unprecedented levels. The EQIP program got $8 billion and some change. The Regional Conservation Partnership Program, which is one we didn't talk about, it's essentially a similar program, but it's funding things on a regional basis and Pennsylvania actually already has they're called RCPP grants. Pennsylvania got a grant for things that essentially it turns over the government fund or the choice of what to fund to the locals and the states involved to say, okay, what's of particular importance in your area? You design the program and we'll give you a grant for it. And then the CSP program got $3.25 billion, and then the easement purchase program got this big infusion of $1.4 billion. Okay, now what's this all about? Well, it's not about the bay here. I mean, yes, it's water quality and soil erosion, all the same things that we're talking about, except look at the language. This is right off the NRCS website. These additional funds will help farmers and ranchers implement expanded conservation practices that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase storage of carbon in their soil and trees. Well, wait a minute. Where did we ever talk about greenhouse gas emissions or the storage of carbon in this entire hour? We've been talking about conservation programs. That's never even been mentioned. So you can see that there is a turn going on, that the depression and the Dust Bowl caused soil erosion to be important. Water quality became very important through the 60s and 70s. And now all of a sudden we're turning, and conservation is now including greenhouse gas emission reductions and storage of carbon in soil and trees. So this just gives you an idea of how malleable these concepts are, and they're adapting to the changing times. But it's the same programs, the same entities administering them, or at least being done by those things that grew up out of the Dust Bowl and the Depression. But we are now entering a new age where these terms like greenhouse gas emissions and carbon storage have become conservation terms in the same way that soil erosion and water quality are. This is revolutionary, it really is. And this gives you an idea in the middle of, and I'll just spill over another minute here. This gives you an idea that we are in the middle of a farm bill cycle. We're not quite done with the current farm bill. And these charts show you the fact that all of these red bars go way up above the farm. These are the farm bill expenditures, for example, for CSP. Here's the new funding coming from the Inflation Reduction Act that is just dwarfing what the farm bill, as Ross went through in Title II, the conservation title, this particular appropriation, or a set of appropriations is dwarfing that. And we haven't even got to next year's farm bill. Now, this will obviously impact next year's farm bill because Title II will not be getting the kind of funding potentially that it usually gets. Or maybe it will. But the bottom line is we are living in unprecedented times in terms of look at these spikes in the amount of money that is going into these programs. Again, traditional soil erosion, traditional water quality, but now we've entered the age of greenhouse gas reduction and carbon's trapping, sequestration, storage, whatever you want to use as the term. So that is where conservation programs are headed. And that is an important I hate to use a bad pun, that is the watershed event here, is that we've crossed into completely new territory that is not based on the Dust Bowl any longer. It's based on an entirely new set of environmental circumstances. Okay. That's it. I will sign off, and I wanted to thank everybody for hanging in there for a few extra minutes. Any other comments from Audrey?
All right, we do have one question if anyone wants to hang around, and we'll type this into the answer if this person is logged off already. But for the 4 to 6 year prior farming for soil banking, must the applicant be the farmer, or could one buy ag land that was farmed 4 to 6 prior years and still apply for farm banking? And we'll type this in as well.
Well, I think we're going to have to explore what you're talking about and what you exactly mean by soil banking or farm banking, just to make sure we're not speaking past each other. So, John, if you want to email Ross or myself, go ahead. And then we can clarify that question. You can get our email addresses on our website.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks everyone so much for joining us today. Please take note of some of our upcoming webinars, and we would like to plug our upcoming Pennsylvania Farm Show Ag Law Symposium that is January 10th and 12th. That will be 2 hours each day. So thanks so much for attending federal and state conservation programs.